and good morning. My name is James O, Head of Sales and Corporate Partnerships at SOSA, coming to you live from my living room. I'm very happy to see everyone here from various parts of the world to listen in on our Hacking the Hacker webinar session. Hopefully everyone on this call is safe and healthy during the pandemic we are facing. This event is co-hosted with the Cybersecurity Collaborative, which you will hear from shortly. Also, we have Chuck Brooks as our illustrious moderator and Fred Mastrippolito as our industry expert in ethical hacking and CEO of Polito Incorporated. A word about SOSA. SOSA is an open innovation company working with multinational corporations and governments to develop and execute tailored innovation strategies that lead to identifying, buying, partnering, and investing in the right startups and new technologies. Our clients say that we're kind of like a radar system for seeing what is coming in the next in their industries in the future. In 2018, SOSA was chosen by the City of New York, which is the Economic Development Corporation, to launch and operate the city's official global cyber center, which is dubbed GCC, to bring together an international community of corporations, investors, startups, and talent to foster collaboration and partnerships within New York City's growing cybersecurity ecosystem. Now, please welcome Stuart Cohen, CEO of the Cybersecurity Collaborative, to describe what him and his organization's efforts look like. Stuart, it's all you.
James, thanks so much. We are really excited about today's session. We are a private organization. We bring together subject matter experts in a peer-to-peer collaboration environment. We started off with a group of about $200 billion companies. Now we've expanded to small businesses around the country with our partnership with the FBI InfraGard. We are heavily involved with cities and counties with the National Association of County Organizations. And we are working with K through 12 organizations through our partnership with COSIN, the Consortium of School Networks. You know, this topic is just near and dear to everybody, with people working from home and people trying to figure out how they're going to return to work. As everyone knows, you know, phishing attacks are up, 10 times from a click-through standpoint. Our members, we've had a number of working groups where our members used to see a 2 to 3 times click-through rate. Now it's in the 20 and 30 times because they're at home. They're not on their own devices. They're obviously on a home Wi-Fi. And the members have put together a whole set of documentation about how to return to work and all the cybersecurity issues associated with that. And that will be available on our private member portal coming up. We are fortunate enough to have Chuck Brooks, one of our ambassadors and one of the leading thought leaders as it relates to cybersecurity. As an ambassador of our organization, he has been working with our members on putting this activity together, and we're looking forward to getting his perspective today on this topic and then hearing from Fred. So with that, Chuck, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Stuart, and welcome everybody. I hope everyone's staying safe. This is a very exciting event for me because we're dealing with the crux of it is how hackers think. Before I get into that, I'll tell you a little bit about my background. I as Stuart mentioned, I'm with the Cybersecurity Collaborative, but I also teach cybersecurity at Georgetown University. I'm a Forbes writer, and I'm one of the 5 most followed people on LinkedIn on technology and cybersecurity issues. And I've had a career inside both private sector and in government, Department of Homeland Security, was one of the original plank holders. And I've watched the cybersecurity become more of a threat from the early years of 2004 till now, and seeing the sophistication, the types of attacks coming now. There are 430 million types of malware created, regularly every day almost, and every 39 seconds there's a cybersecurity attack. So one of my experiences was I was down at the United States Transportation Command a few years back, and I was able to talk to a group of people, mostly generals and others, on one thing, and they brought in basically a young guy who was a hacker who had no formal education, but I think he was actually from Australia, and they set up a system, a dummy system, but their network was comprised of both of government and private sector stuff, and he was able to hack into it and get to everything within literally minutes. So with that thought, I'm really happy today to introduce our featured guest. Fred Mastrippolito, and his company Polito. He's actually what you call a white hat hacker. He knows how hackers think, how they do it. He has over 20 years of experience working for government, including FBI, Department of Energy. His firm specializes in mitigation and remediation strategies, and he's an expert at incident response. And I'm very excited to introduce Fred, who's going to give a short presentation, and then we're going to open this up. I'm going to ask him some questions, and I'm going to also make it available for the audience, because it's rare that you get a chance to speak to someone who actually thinks like a hacker, is a hacker, luckily on the right side, and can give insights into what we're facing now, particularly in a new digital era. And with that, I welcome Fred.
Thanks, Chuck. Yes, I think someone said that you do what you love, and you never have to work a day in your life. So what I love to do is hacking. I'll start a little presentation here on what that means. So 20 years ago, I started working at the Pentagon and hacking .mil sites. Luckily, they were paying me to do it. There's a lot of other people that do this for free, or at least that's, I guess, how they start. So I got my start with actually working with military systems, hacking government systems. And then as I progressed, I moved into the finance departments, working with different banks, hospitals, and other organizations. So what is a hacker? A hacker thinks things outside of the box, and they attack different problems in ways that you wouldn't think of. So that could be both good and bad. You have good hackers that can find new solutions that nobody's ever thought of before. But there are also bad hackers that are looking to take advantage of people and do criminal activity.
Other quick, there's hackers, but is there also nation state hackers and criminal hackers and just hacktivists? Can you comment a little bit about the differences?
Absolutely. So your nation state hackers are the ones that are heavily funded, whereas you have activist hackers that are hacking for a political cause, and they don't have a lot of funds. They're mostly opportunistic. So that means that they're looking to find low-hanging fruit. They're looking for the easy wins. So it's really a matter of budget. The thing is, I think in both cases, they have about equal opportunity to get into a lot of different systems. So. To show you some of the techniques that we use, we attack different systems through web applications, phishing attacks, social engineering, and just on-site attacks externally. The thing about hackers is we look at things in a different perspective. So we're looking for something that the original creators didn't intend. So web applications aren't developed purposely to have vulnerabilities in them. But a hacker knows that applications are built by humans, and humans are made to make mistakes. So nothing's going to be perfect. A hacker only has to find that one vulnerability in order to be able to take advantage of that.
Key question here. As a white hat hacker, I mean, you say you must understand the black hat mentality. How do you learn about the mentality? Do you go to the dark web? Do you get trained? Do you get certifications? Where do you learn to understand where the threats are coming from and the mentality of the people making the threats?
It's interesting. 20 years ago, we would be looking at mailing lists, like following bug track. But today, a lot of people are posting on Twitter. So, different hashtags. If you're looking for the latest vulnerability, looking for CVEs, common vulnerabilities and exposures. So you're looking for that new exploit that maybe somebody had created that would attack a certain different operating system or application. So the hackers that are opportunistic, their basic modus operandi is to find that new vulnerability that everybody is talking about or just published, and then they search the whole internet for that specific vulnerability.
Wow. And there are other algorithms to search the internet with that they use, or is it something that you just get easily from these social media sites and dark websites?
It is. So once you get good at finding vulnerabilities, then and exploiting them, it kind of becomes a pattern. So you'll see the same vulnerabilities pop up multiple times. There's a new Microsoft vulnerability for Windows SMB messaging, and that allows the attacker to take remote control over that system. It gets patched, but the hackers will find a new way to exploit a very similar vulnerability in a slightly different way. So the more surface area of attack that an attacker can take advantage of, the better the chances that the attacker can have of getting some success.
Now, is their method still primarily phishing?
Phishing is one of the big ones. I think there's something new, I think maybe not new, but recent, is the bulk email compromises. So a lot of companies are getting phished, social engineering. They're getting these emails from what looks like someone they know. It could be from their accountant saying, we have a new routing number, send all this money to this new account. And if they don't call the person up and say, hey, is this new routing number legitimate? In a lot of cases, they actually send out money. We're also seeing a lot of compromises of Office 365. And that's a big concern, because if they're able to brute force your 365 password, then they are essentially you. So we can send out emails to your clients, send malware to your clients, and also fraudulent invoices. What we're seeing with compromises in Office 365 are they'll set up a rule in your in your mailbox to automatically forward a lot of any emails that have certain words in it, like invoices, so they can get those invoices, change them slightly, add in their new banking account number, and then send it to their targets.
That's a scary thought. But you know what I've noticed interesting in the last sort of several years is that these type of attacks are become so much more sophisticated. It used to be that you could sort of recognize them because of bad graphics or spelling errors, but now you get something, it could be from your antivirus carrier, or it could be from a bank, or it could be, usually, I guess Amazon is still the number one used to fake. But it's very difficult to recognize. How do you recognize it? Is there a way to do that? If you're looking not to click on anything, do you check anything first to see if it's potentially a phishing attack?
So the best way to do it is to not click on links. If you hover over the link, you can see what the link is, and then you want to make sure that the link is legitimate. So if you get an email from your bank, don't click on the email. Go to the bank's website directly and log in that way.
Great advice.
You can create a domain that looks very similar. Say you bank at Bank of America, the attackers will do a Bank of America something.com, which, if you look at it at first glance and you only see the first two letters, and you may think that that's legitimate, but it's definitely not.
Now, you mentioned the attack surface getting so large. How does the Internet of Things fall into this? Does this make it much more difficult now to defend?
It is. Yep. Yeah. So everybody's putting up their new devices on the internet. You can monitor your fish tank. That was a recent compromise for a casino was they had a IoT device that was connected to a fish tank, and that was used by the attackers to be able to compromise that casino network.
Oh, scary. Everything is a conduit.
Yeah, so you have your different devices, your routers, switches, all these things are getting connected. I think that's also a big risk with people working from home with VPN devices. Lately, there's been a lot of new vulnerabilities identified in VPNs. So you have to make sure that if you are using a VPN, I'm sure all of us are now working from home, that it's up to date in the very latest software, and that it's secure, and that people are using things like two-factor authentication. So I think that's probably one of the best ways that a lot of attacks can be stopped, is by making sure that you have that two-factor authentication configured and that it's secure.
Great. And what's a typical attack framework?
So there's really no typical. I think a lot of attackers are using what would be like a tiered structure, where they're sending emails from one system, and then they're sending the malware so that it will connect back to a different system, so that if your defenses were able to stop any one of those, they might not stop all of them. So they'll, if you think of a typical web application system, where it's the three tiers, the web application, the database, and the application server, attackers are doing the same type of thing, where they're protecting their infrastructure. They're using the domains that can be easily created, and if one of them gets stopped, then they just switch to a different domain.
Are there any trend you're seeing, like what's the most popular cybersecurity attack you're seeing now in your world?
So we are seeing a lot of compromises of Office 365. Because it's so successful, I think that's why you're seeing so many of them. It's we stopped one just this week, or last week, where someone had almost sent $90,000 to a company, and there was a typo in the routing number, so it didn't actually go through. But they realized that they had a problem when they saw that almost losing $90,000.
Gosh. Are you also seeing an expansion of ransomware attacks? Is that becoming more of a trend, particularly against healthcare that doesn't have the security or the resources to not pay?
It is. We've had some hospitals that have been compromised with ransomware, and it's really unfortunate, because of all the places that you would hope would be protected, it would be our hospitals. But these are also places that typically don't have the best budgets for security. I think that the challenge that a lot of people have is, we don't want to spend money needlessly, but at the same time, we want to be secure. So ransomware, you would think that our antivirus would protect us, but attackers, again, are able to change malware so that it looks just a little bit different and avoid those signatures. So if you're relying 100% on signatures, it's not going to be a way that you'll be successful in stopping ransomware.
Interesting too is that, along with hospitals, education is the same issue. They don't have the security budgets, and they have a lot of varying networks, sometimes connected. What could a K through 12 school do to better protect themselves? That's a question from someone in the audience.
So we are seeing K through 12 schools moving more to the cloud, and that's moved a lot of the security vulnerabilities from in-house hosting to your cloud vendors. Moving to Office 365, by default, Office 365 has a lot of different security vectors, protections built into it. Same with Gmail. They both support two-factor authentication, but all these things need to be configured, and they need to be configured correctly and checked up on. So by default, these protections are not enabled. That's a good question. Yeah, I think by moving to the cloud, you're limiting your attack surface to that cloud type system.
So you're seeing a lot of companies now move to the cloud or hybrid cloud. Is that also?
Absolutely, yeah. I think the problem is that your custom applications might not work in the cloud-based system, but I think it's definitely a strategy that people are doing when they're trying to deal with these different types of threats. But they're still susceptible to phishing attacks to the user. I think the user is always going to be a big weakness in all these, because you can block them on email, but the attackers are just going to set up different domains, or attackers will use Gmail, or attackers will use Outlook. And your sophisticated users are going to pick up on that, and they're not going to click those links. They're not going to, they're going to send it to spam. But if the attackers can get just one or two successes, then that could fund their enterprises.
Thanks.
And through some of these. So your black hats are looking for, basically their max gain is to try and get as much money as they can. They're developing exploits. It can be expensive to develop an exploit. If you're developing something to defeat antivirus, it could take a couple weeks. So you got to figure for the average IT guy, a couple weeks worth of work could cost like $10,000 or something. So if you're looking at what attackers are investing in their attack strategy, our organizations also have to match that with their protection.
I think one of the issues also, I guess, for any company is to discover that they've actually been breached, and understand that it's sometimes could be months. What is your recommendations? I guess particularly to the administrator, whoever is looking at the company data, how do they protect it so they are be aware that they've been breached?
So FireEye says that the average dwell time for typical hacker on-site at network is 78 days, and it used to be like 100 days. So the dwell time is decreasing. What we've seen was attackers will get onto a system. Recently, we were working at a bank, and they detected that Cobalt Strike was being used across their network through antivirus signature. So they called us in to do an investigation, and we were able to block the attackers before they could start their exfiltration of the data and the encryption of assets. So it really is a matter of time. What companies can do to try and decrease that dwell time is having some proactive steps. So what companies should be doing is they should be running their own scans for vulnerabilities. That's the easiest thing they can do quickly to find these vulnerabilities first. The second thing they could do is proactive phishing their users. And the third thing that companies should do is proactively look for signs of compromise. What we're looking for in compromises is things that attackers leave behind. There was a very famous detective back in, I think the father of forensics, says that every time someone touches something, they leave a little something behind. And you're looking for those breadcrumbs that attackers leave. So you're not looking for necessarily the malware, but you're looking for things that attackers do. You're looking at the logs on your systems. Proactive log analysis, I think, is really important. But who has time for that? So you got to dedicate one person to periodically go through these logs and make sure that if someone is actively attacking you that you would detect it. What are the types?
Is there any automation technologies that are helping this now sort of fill this gap because of the time frame? And sometimes a lot of particularly small businesses who are the subject of almost half the attacks don't have the resources or the capabilities to even know. Is there outside ways of doing that, looking at managed services to look at protecting companies?
Absolutely, yes. I think that's important. You can what we can do is look at what are your peers doing, what are other CISOs doing. I think if you are talking to an outside consultant, then try and get multiple different consultants and see if you can get a competitive bid. It's important to see what you're getting, what are you paying for. So I think you should get the previous sample reports that they've created and see if that's something that matches with what you would expect for a for your company.
Great.
Just to recap, your white hat hackers are thinking like black hat. When you're looking at your own company and you want to know if there are vulnerabilities, then you have to kind of think like the bad guys sometimes. And that's not hard for people, but it's something that some people really like to specialize in. Again, no target is too small. So even if you're a mom and pop shop and you want to look for vulnerabilities, you could look at things like running some port scanners to see what ports were open publicly. So there's a number of different ways you could help yourself to find these things.
Now, what skill sets do you need to be a white hacker, and how do you gain those skill sets? Is it helpful to be like a gamer background, someone that is familiar with X's and O's?
I think it's good to have a curiosity to know how things work, and then to try and make things work in ways that were unexpected. So definitely pretty interesting field to be in.
So it takes a lot of creativity.
Yeah. What open source tools are we using? That's one of the questions from an attendee. So we really like to use Elastic. It's free. So you can have all your logs going into Elastic. You can do your threat intelligence in that. There are some machine learning tools with Elastic. So if you haven't heard of it, I definitely recommend it. You can have a very cheap endpoint security system using these open source tools. So definitely something that I think would be good to have.
Now you mentioned something interesting right there, machine learning being used to defend. Should we be worried about what the adversaries have, or are they using machine learning to attack? Will they be eventually using artificial intelligence to attack?
Yep, definitely. I think nation states definitely do use machine learning for that. There was a DARPA challenge where they had 2 automated attack systems that would attack the same different problems. And they were able to come up with new ways of attacking that no human had ever detected before. But when you combine both the computer learning and human being, that success becomes even greater. So it's very interesting. I think what's going to drive this really is motivation. It's going to be money. The more resources that organizations have to put into this type of technology, the greater successes that you're going to have. Because it costs a lot of money for these types of resources.
So that's why the financial institutions and a lot of the bigger companies can afford this, but a lot of the smaller and medium-sized businesses are going to have to rely on outside help.
That's true. Yep. So I think Elastic is a good way to go. Security Onion is another great free tool that people should be using. Security Onion is a open source. It's basically open source monitoring tool. You could look at everything from net logs to look for signature-based attacks on your network. So it's a very useful tool for the defenders. So, but
This
you have to
question,
really,
one question sort of goes into the slide you have in front of us is, if you're a company that has virtually or little or no experience with cybersecurity, where do you start with building a cybersecurity program? I mean, you know, and this is, I think, a good leeway right into your presentation here.
Absolutely. So I do think that it's important for companies to map out what they have first. And once they have an account of what they have, then they can create strategies for remediation. So after you map out what all the different systems that you have, you can do your vulnerability scans with something like Nessus, find your vulnerabilities, and then have a way to track these vulnerabilities so that you can have a plan to fix them. Your cybersecurity program should say that you fix things within X amount of days that are high risk, less amount of days for medium risk, and maybe the least priority or the low risk. So it's all about setting those priorities for your organization.
What is a typical budget for a small business?
So yeah, it definitely varies. I think the tools are not expensive. What's expensive is the expertise to use them. So I think, though, nowadays with everything being on YouTube, you could probably find how to do this if you had the time to do it. So you had that way off between how much would it cost to pay somebody to do it, or if you could just learn some of this stuff yourself and do it. But again, it goes back to passion. You have to have a passion for this stuff to be able to do it well.
So from your own perspective, what cybersecurity services do you always wish that your clients would sign off on? You know, because obviously you can't, you're talking about the onion, you can't do everything, but you can do some things that can be a deterrent or at least protect you from most attacks. Is there any service that you recommend more highly than the others?
It's always good to be proactive. So most of our work these past couple months have been reactive. It's responding to incident response, responding to ransomware, and if people are more proactive, then there would be less response. What we like to see is people doing vulnerability assessments, web application assessments, code review, and finding these new vulnerabilities that they didn't know were there before the bad guys do. We also like to see the threat hunting. Threat hunting is when you're looking for you're not looking for vulnerabilities, looking for attackers in your organization that have already taken advantage of these vulnerabilities. So it's that proactive mindset of looking for signs of the attackers, looking through the logs, looking for changes in the systems that only an attacker would do. So to be a good threat hunter, you have to think like the attacker and think, what would the attacker do? What would their next move be? And then look for those things. So if you know that attacker, typically once they go in the box, is going to launch PowerShell. First thing you want to do as your threat detection is to look for signs that PowerShell is run. If part of that PowerShell usage is that they're going to try and encrypt their communications, then you want to look for encrypted communications. So it's always trying to stay in step with the attacker.
Yeah. Along those lines, what can any individual or even a business do for basic cybersecurity? What would be on your checklist for basic cybersecurity hygiene? And just that everyone should do every day, or because again, always human seems to be the weakest link, and you want to do all you can to protect yourself.
I think automatic updates for Windows systems has really saved a lot of people lately, but it's still not enough. We still need to make sure that systems are configured correctly. Something that you can do every day, I think, is looking for your, staying up to date on your software, making sure that patches are up to date on, because even though your Microsoft Windows patches are automatically updating, the patches for your VPN server or your web application may not be. So most likely they aren't.
What about passwords? Should you change them often or?
Yeah, so I definitely recommend using a password manager and having randomized different passwords for different systems. A password manager should make that a lot easier for managing that. So passwords are still a common way of people getting compromised. But in addition to having strong passwords, we also should be enabling things like two-factor authentication. There's something called YubiKey, which people are using to help with that two-factor authentication that would stop these brute force attacks. In some cases, I've heard of two-factor authentication not being enough. For example, if the application is not configured correctly, there are ways to bypass the two-factor authentication. Or also, I've heard of people relying on their cell phone for the two-factor authentication and then losing their phone. So both cases, yep.
A lot of you said actually relates to what Stuart opened up with, the COVID-19 sort of threats that are happening right now. Is there anything else you would add, with a lot of the increased ransomware and phishing attacks coming along and fake websites coming along with COVID-19, what we can do?
So we are seeing a number of COVID-19 themed spear phishing attacks, and what we're doing to try and counter that is again, making sure that our systems are up to date. Some companies are using something called Proofpoint, which helps a lot, I think, in blocking our spear phishing attacks. Proactive phishing from phishing your own users within the organization is a good way to keep them on their toes. So I know users probably don't like that, but it's definitely a way to make sure that you can monitor those click-through rates or make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do and reporting these. That's another thing is when you do detect phishing is to send those alerts right away to the administrator so that they know that an attack is imminent or in progress so that they can prepare for it. So definitely want to make sure that you keep communication lines open.
Now, this is interesting. We're speaking mostly about small businesses and medium businesses, but a lot of large businesses have been breached in the last few years. Some big names like Target, Equifax, Uber. You can go on and on, including OPM, which took 22 million personnel files. So, what do the really large agencies and companies? What are they doing wrong, and what can they do better?
Sure. So I think it's important for the large companies to be able to look for these different flaws. I kind of wanted to talk about some recent compromises that happened to large antiviruses.
Great.
So in this case, a lot of these different antivirus companies were attacked by these different hacker groups, and you really do have to wonder if companies whose very focus is in cybersecurity are getting hacked. What can companies who really just want to make money, and run their business going to do? So it's kind of interesting that these companies are still struggling. In this case, you can guess. So McAfee, Symantec, Trend Micro, Bitdefender, Kaspersky were all hacked. Can you guess which ones were not hacked by the Russians? So.
Well, I think I know that one, but maybe in the audience.
Yes.
Yeah, Kaspersky is probably the only one that wasn't hacked by the Russians. So.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So in these cases, these companies were hacked through their open web applications that weren't locked down like they should have been. They also there's different phishing attacks, and so again, I think it becomes important that organizations, no matter how big and small, is that they know that they're a target and they act accordingly, and they invest in having some people that are on the spot to proactively try and look for these vulnerabilities. And then they have other people that are proactive in looking for signs that these vulnerabilities are being taken advantage of.
Yeah.
So this is really a strategy of the whole red team versus blue team. In a security environment where these things are working together, you'll have the red team actively trying to break into the organization and exploit these different flaws. And then the blue team is actively trying to defend. And when either of these two fail, in a well-organized organization, they work together to help each other succeed. So it's not an adversarial relationship. They should be working together.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense, and it's critical. I know it's being done in government, and I think companies should do more and more of that. Interesting enough, do you think from a hacker mentality, do you think that these cybersecurity companies are really targeted to be more of like a badge of honor, that they can hack the cybersecurity companies? It's not necessarily that they have the best ability to extort money from them or secrets, but they really can put that in. Oh, we can get anywhere. And just
yeah, absolutely. And the one that attacked Bitdefender is the same group that attacked the DNC servers. So it's definitely they're not targeting specifically just one area. They're targeting really broad areas, and in order to be able to defend against that, we have to realize that we're all targets, really. So that's it's kind of scary.
yes. So the bottom line is everyone is vulnerable.
Everybody's vulnerable. The attackers are always going to have the advantage because they get to pick and choose what they're attacking. The blue team has the hardest job, in my opinion, because they have to think in ways that they haven't been able to think before. So imagine trying to find something that is attacking you that you have no idea what it's going to come from. The strategies that blue team are doing is they're looking at trends in the out on the internet for how are other companies getting hacked. They're tracking through these different groups. What are the methods that the specific hacker group is using, and then they're looking for signs that those methods are succeeding in their own environment, and hoping that they never see it, but always being prepared that one day they may see these signs and know that they've been hacked.
Great. Yeah, can you share a few of your just sort of transition, I guess, from our presentation here to your own personal experiences? Can you share some of the anecdotes that you've had with really interesting situations where you've encountered sort of creative hacks, or you've had a client that may have been in a process of being hacked, and you caught it up front because of some of the processes you just discussed earlier?
Sure. Yeah. So we had a recent case where it was a small business. They do like tiles, stone tiles, and his email account was used to send an email to a client saying that instead of paying me at my old bank account, just send to this new bank account. And so the client called him up, luckily, and asked him about it, and he realized that he had a problem. So he called us, he contacted us, he found us on the internet, and we did a look at his Outlook 365 settings, and we found there was a rule in there that would forward all the emails that had the word invoice in it to a Gmail account. So we looked in further, and we found that the someone from South Africa had accessed his Outlook email from possibly VPN, but it wasn't him. So we were able to track down where the attack was coming from, what the attackers did, and he was able to save himself from losing money. So that's one of the successes. There's many failures where it doesn't get detected and they lose a lot of money. In another case, I had a lady who sells these things called run lights. They're gloves with flashlights on them. So very small business, and she probably makes, selling these lights, they're grossing maybe 100,000 a year. Really good business, but her supplier in China that was manufacturing these run lights emailed her to say that they had a new bank account, and not being a sophisticated user, she said, okay, I'll wire the money right away so I can get these our deliveries. And unfortunately, she wired the money and then called had second thoughts, called the factory in China, and found out that they didn't ask her to change the money. So she lost $40,000 on that. So it's sad stories. It actually happened to my sister-in-law. So it's kind of hits close to home. I think people aren't expecting that, that these things can happen, but they do happen all the time. So it's in some ways, I think it hurts the most because it's embarrassing. You lose the money, and it's just one of those sad stories.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's just becoming more and more all too common. Everyone knows someone or ourselves have been victimized by identity theft or other things. So I guess the basic lesson here is you have to always be constantly aware of what you're doing digitally. And do you recommend subscribing to sites that monitor your credit and other things, or is that too late?
I'm not sure how that would help in this case, but maybe in other cases it would. I know it's important to make sure you have that open line of communication with people that you're sending money to. Have at least 2 lines of communication. So if someone sends an email, make sure that you get on the phone and talk to them before you send any money. And I don't care how much money it is. I really hate the fact that we're encouraging bad behavior, and that's exactly what we're doing when we're paying these criminals, no matter whether it's ransomware, whether it's through these fraudulent invoices. These people are doing it because it works. So it's working well.
You just mentioned a really important area. I mean, should anyone at any circumstance pay ransomware, or should they never pay ransomware?
So I think if you want more attacks, then you pay the ransom, because I've seen this happen multiple times where clients have paid the ransom, and they used a really good incident response firm to help recover. They were able to recover their files, and that was great. But then a couple months go by, and all of a sudden they have all their systems ransomed again. So you really can't trust these people. They're criminals. They're going to try and get you as many times as they can, because that's how they make money. And it's going to be easier to hack someone that you already hacked before, because you already know their systems. So you really want to, if your whole goal, your game plan is to recover by paying the ransom and then recovering your files, it doesn't end there. You really have to consider re-imaging everything because you don't know where these attackers have been, and trying to recover that way. But if you do pay the ransom, just realize that you're probably going to be targeted again.
Is there a way, I mean, this may be outside the purview of it, is there a way to actually prosecute these hackers, particularly when they're all over the world and a lot of the countries don't care that are hosting them? I mean, how do you ever stop this? Is there any way legal, I mean, through law enforcement or legal action to stop them, or is it purely to have better active cybersecurity defenses and incident response capabilities?
Yeah, I think it's the way I think that organizations are able to kind of recover from this is by keeping things open and everything. But what was that last question again, Stuart?
I mean, the question I think really was related to is that the prosecution of hackers, it's very difficult, isn't it? And
oh yeah,
you know,
so
really, yeah, it goes back to
question.
being proactive rather than defensive is probably more important.
Yeah, we've seen some cases where hackers are overseas. It's very hard to prosecute these people. But once they reach a certain threshold, then they get on FBI's radar, and FBI goes after them, even if they are in denied regions, even if they are hard to get to. They've set up companies and offered these hackers lucrative employment contracts, but required that they come and visit. And when they come and visit, then they're arrested. Also, these hackers get these amazing vacation deals to places like Thailand, which have extradition treaties with the United States. So if something's too good to be true, there's definitely something going on. Yeah, these hackers can get tricked, and they are tricked. And so the life of crime does pay, but eventually karma catches up with them. At least that's what I like to hope.
Yeah, I would have to hear that. Yeah. And one other thing I mentioned, because you do a lot with looking at vulnerability assessments. How much of is an issue of insider threat in companies that you're dealing with as clients?
That's a really good question. We're getting a lot of cases where employees leave companies and not necessarily on the greatest terms. So they're leaving the company and then finding that they have these relationships with companies that developed at the old company. Stealing customers, is probably at worst. At best, I don't know how you can describe it, but what we're seeing is companies are realizing that it's okay to trust your employees, but you want to verify that everything is legitimate, that they're doing what they're supposed to, that they're turning over all their resources that they were using at the company, and that they're not doing anything they shouldn't do, that they're not stealing intellectual property. So that's definitely a big area of concern, is intellectual property theft.
Right. Now we're nearing the end, so I want to know, is there anything you'd like to leave the listeners with some core advice? If they do one or two things, what should they do to enhance their cybersecurity perspectives and defenses?
Yeah, I think it's important that when you're looking at your security, that you're having fun. Consider it a challenge. I think it's worthwhile for anybody to learn from. And so I think if there's one thing I would suggest, is that reach out to your hacker friends and ask us questions. I think most hackers like to share. We like to show our knowledge, and we like to help people. At least the good hackers do. So.
Great. Well, thank you, Fred. It's been very illuminating, and thank you, SOSA, and thank you, Cybersecurity Collaborative. We look forward to hearing more. And it's a very great topic, and it was very fascinating for me to get the inside the mind of a hacker, luckily a white white hat hacker. Thank you again.
Awesome. Thank you.
And now we'll go to James.
All right, thanks so much, guys. I truly hope that everybody on this webinar has gained some knowledge about the hacker's mindset and how to help protect against known and unknown security risks. I would like to thank our partners, Stuart and the Cybersecurity Collaborative, our moderator, Chuck Brooks, and of course, our presenter, Fred Mastrippolito, for the engaging presentation and knowledge. If anyone has any further questions, I would engage further and urge you to reach out to every individual on this call. If you do not know how to reach them, simply reach out to me and I will directly connect you with them. Thank you very much and have a blessed day.